It's just another bouncy, breezy, brainless musical trading on a bit of name recognition. Wow. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my stagey YouTube channel. If you're meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is Mickey Joe, I am obsessed with all things theatre, and I am a professional theatre critic here in the UK, who mostly reviews shows here on my stagey YouTube channel. Today I want to talk to you about a show I went to see earlier this week. So on Wednesday night, I was invited to the press night of Bonnie and Clyde the musical at the Garrick Theatre. The show is already popular here in the West End because it played a previous run last year at the Arts Theatre. And prior to that, it had established a certain amount of cult popularity due to the enduring success of the cast recording and the fact that Jeremy Jordan and Laura Osnes were part of the original cast. In any case, Bonnie and Clyde has returned to the West End this week for another limited engagement, and its fan base is already in place. There was a whole group of them who went to the first preview performance, there were some there at press night, and the show has an undeniable level of popularity. Specifically undeniable because they recently won the What's on Stage award for Best New Musical. If you don't know, this is a theatre award that is nominated and voted for by the public, by theatregoers, and Bonnie and Clyde was the recipient of one of this year's top prizes. However, the situation couldn't have been more different just a few weeks later when the Olivier Award nominations were announced. So these are the most prestigious theatre awards here in the UK. They're the British version of the Tony Awards. And Bonnie and Clyde, not only was it not nominated for Best New Musical, they did not receive a single nomination, not for its cast, not for its creative team. They were one of the most shocking snubs of this year's nominations. So clearly there has been a disconnect here between the nominators for the Olivier Awards and the public who nominated and voted for the show for the What's on Stage award. And after the show's press night earlier this week, we are seeing that yet again. Because, as is often the case, the show's PR team had invited a whole mix of reviewers to come and see the show and share their thoughts. So you had bloggers and vloggers, and you also had the critics who work for print media like The Times, and also online outlets as well, like What's on Stage, like Time Out. Also Broadway World UK, and The Stage, and The Evening Standard. Various different outlets were represented at the press night. And while for the most part, the bloggers and vloggers gave 4 and 5 star reviews, and mine is forthcoming, do not worry, the newspaper critics were a little less kind. In fact, the show attained a surprising number of 2-star reviews. And people were shocked by the disparity between these two groups in their reception to the show, prompting people to ask, did we even see the same musical? So today I want to read through some of these reviews and try and work out why it is that so many critics took a disliking to this show, and if perhaps we can read into that a little bit. So a few things to clarify first. I have already reviewed the show. I don't like to read other people's reviews until after I have filmed mine. Mine has already been filmed. In fact, it is already live on YouTube for my YouTube members. So if you sign up at the link in the description for £2.99, you will already be able to see my Bonnie and Clyde review. For everyone who is not one of my exclusive members, do not worry, it will be live on my channel very soon. But needless to say, anything I say in this video, anything I read in today's video is not going to sway my opinion. My opinion is already filmed and edited, and it takes far too long for me to want to do that again. The other thing I want to say, I put out a tweet earlier today. Where is it? I want to find it. Here we go, here we go, here we go. If you're not following me on Twitter for the stagey hot takes, you are missing out, let me tell you. Scrolling through various nonsense I've tweeted since. So, I tweeted, sometimes I feel like the theatre critics who review musicals based solely on the strength of their books, which is to say the script, aren't relevant to the audiences who book tickets solely on the strength of their scores. And I want to do a little bit of market research ahead of today's video. I want to know, you as a person watching this video, do you tend to book tickets for a musical because of the songs, because you've heard the cast recording and you're excited to hear those performed on stage? Or does it tend to be for the narrative and the script? Which one is more important to you? I'm genuinely very curious. And also, how much do you consider reviews? I say that as someone who is going to be watching my channel and watching a video about reviews, so that's probably not a great sample size, but I'm very curious about all of this. In any case, let's have a read of some of the reviews and see what it is that we're talking about here. So I'm going to start off with the What's on Stage review because this was a 4-star review, which is actually what I've given the show as well. I actually already disclosed that after the press night. I made it known that it was going to be a 4-star review, and my full video forthcoming. So Alex, the editor here, talking about punchy, crowd-pleasing tunes that can be launched to the back of the royal circle by some titanic voices. Chief among those voices are returning stars Jordan Luke Gage and Mayli McCann. Gage makes each of his solo numbers look easy. Raise a Little Hell, brackets, and probably a bit of the roof, close brackets, being a highlight. McCann, for her part, is note perfect as Bonnie. Her Act 2 number, Dying Ain't So Bad, delivered with panache and well-assessed melancholy. Ooh, lovely tenor phrase. Bonnie and Clyde interrogates the American dream in a world where dreams are being stripped apart by poverty. It's interesting how both Bonnie, pining to be a movie star, and Clyde, dreaming of being famous, take the pioneering rhetoric of independence and aspiration seizing and apply them to reckless lawlessness. What a turn of phrase there. At the same time, aided by numbers like God's Arms Are Always Open, a sense of religious fervour underpins the piece. That it does, I agree. While thematically richer than most musicals, Menschel's plotlines are slightly meandering, though director Nick Winston whips up a sharp pace that cracks through the tragic twosome's murderous time, never unnecessarily alighting. So talking about the themes of the show there, but also talking about the score and talking about the cast. I want you to remember that as we look forward to these other reviews and think about the thing that I tweeted before. I'm going to circle back to all of this. Next up, so that was a 4-star review. We're going down to a 3-star review now from Broadway World UK. This one writes that the leading pair return to the roles and are incredibly comfortable with their characters. Their chemistry remains tangible. Gage is the right kind of charming with a real unhinged darkness behind the eyes and a barely concealed violence. His vocal ability is given a real challenge, but his rousing version of Raise a Little Hell does indeed raise the roof. That's twice we've heard that turn of phrase now. An irresistible linguistic comparison, I dare say. McCann is ravishing in the role, vocally astute and with a clear weakness for the bad boy. The fact that the outcome is all too clear makes her swooning even more arresting, with a sweet yet powerful voice shown beautifully in How About a Dance. She does do a fantastic job of both of those numbers. It's interesting that two different critics there chose to pick out different moments of the score to highlight her at her vocal best. I think that just shows how people take different things away from an evening. And then also going on to talk about Dom Hartley Harris giving a standout performance in the gospel anthem God's Arms Are Always Open. Nick Winston's excellent choreography in this number makes you wonder why there isn't more of the same elsewhere. The problem is that detail is too light and context is essential to gain real investment in the characters. Clyde's anger at his poverty and social injustice is clear, but Bonnie's conversion to a life of violent crime barely takes a moment. The deputy sheriff's longing for her goes nowhere, and the pair's infamy among the public is curious, without enough exploration of the social pressures of the Great Depression. And although we all know that the pair die in a hail of bullets, their end feels oddly undramatic. This is true. It's definitely a surprising choice to have the ending be staged the way it is, where their death is implied and we don't actually see it happening. I think there is something quite stirring about doing it that way, but I also understand from a dramatic standpoint why it also feels like an odd choice to a lot of people. Going back to what was said about Bonnie's conversion to a life of violent crime barely taking a moment. This criticism does resonate with me because there are points in the show where it feels like she all too readily jumps on board. But I think you also have to be mindful of the drive and the ambition with which Mayli McCann is playing this role. And that's meant to be, I think, the thing that explains away some of her questionable decision making. Like, why is she so willing to be propelled into this life of villainy? And it's because she is intoxicated first with her romance with Clyde and then subsequently with the fame that it finally affords her. She's not making great choices in any case. The show feels pacey and there are some great tracks, gospel, country and bluegrass all feature, as well as the expected power ballads, but some fall into being formulaic with unforgettable lyrics. So that's what's said about the score in this review. So the themes that are beginning to emerge among these early reviews. A lot of praise for Jordan and Francis's performances, particularly for their vocal performances. That has been named in both of these reviews so far, with various different songs being mentioned. Some other characters perhaps being a little bit underdeveloped. There has been praise for Nick Winston's choreography for God's Arms Are Always Open. And the issues that we're beginning to see and read about would be the lack of context and the lack of detail in the narrative. Let's carry on. So this is where we start to arrive at a string of 2-star reviews from major publications. I'm going to read you excerpts from the reviews on iNews, The Evening Standard, The Stage, Time Out, and The Times, all of which gave 2-star reviews, which I don't need to tell you is reasonably damning. Here's iNews, which begins oddly with a paragraph about 6. 6. That glorious feminist spin on the many wives of Henry VIII famously started its London life in the tiny arts theatre before progressing regally onto bigger venues. Some might think it a good omen that Bonnie and Clyde is making the same journey after a run at the arts last year, but there is little chance of this unexciting musical achieving a 6-style level of longevity. This, I mean, when I know that these journalists have a word count, that seems like a pointless waste of a paragraph to just draw a harsh comparison between the two. Just because they've played the same venue and both transferred out of it doesn't mean that one is expecting to emulate the same level of success. Nor do I think it's particularly productive to compare everything to the benchmark of one particularly successful musical. The fact that the show ran in a post-pandemic landscape, the fact that it's attained the fans that it has, the fact that it's achieving a second London run at all, I think is still noteworthy and worthy of celebration. Just the fact that it's not necessarily going to become a global sensation in the same way need not doom it to failure. The show famously lasted for just 1 month on Broadway in 2011, and as it grinds on, one understands why. How the creative trio of Ivan Menchel, Don Black and Frank Wildhorn managed to take the sizzling story of those two infamous Texan lover criminals and render it simultaneously devoid of romance and thrill is bewildering. We then have a bit of a paragraph talking about the beginning of the show, the way that we flash back to a younger Bonnie and Clyde after seeing the scene of their death and having it described to us. It's written here, Gage unfortunately makes Clyde far less vivid than the peppy McCann. Everyone tries to warn Bonnie off Clyde, but the lady's not for turning. We increasingly find ourselves rooting for only one half of the partnership in Nick Winston's production, which is problematic. I don't know that I agree with that. I think the overall sensation for me always seems to be that the two deserve each other in every sense, whether or not you agree with the choices that they are making. The music spans genres, taking in gospel and rock, and an early eye-catcher is the perky country and western number You're Going Back to Jail, sung with gusto by Clyde's sister-in-law Blanche. Yet the core problem persists. No line in either script or lyrics has those vital ingredients of surprise and sparkle. It's all relentlessly predictable, and the cumulative effect is enervating. Crime, we're always told, doesn't pay, but it surely should be way more fun to watch than this. So there's some criticism of both the script and lyrics there, but the description of the score does seem incredibly brief. Only one song is specifically mentioned. It talks about the different genres of the score, and that's a theme we're seeing already. That's the second review to talk about the score having various different genres, which is more of a description than it is an analysis. This isn't really a criticism of the score, it's just an explanation as to the kind of things that it sounds like. I'm building to a point here, bear with me. Next, we have the 2-star review from The Times. Even with reminders of family poverty, of the depression, of southern religiosity? I don't know how to pronounce that word. I'm going to be completely candid with you right now. Religiosity. Perhaps. Cue gospel dancing so good that you long for much more of Winston's choreography than the show has space to offer. I appreciate that line because it's mindful of the fact that the show doesn't have space to include more of Nick Winston's choreography, that it would be inappropriate for there to be more dance numbers in Bonnie and Clyde, but also that's the second time we've heard someone noting that that number is so good you want for there to be more of it in the show. That's a theme we're seeing here. The context is only superficial in a show that is all about the context. That's the second comment about context not being present that we've heard as well. When later on we are told that Bonnie and Clyde have captured the public imagination, you think, really? How? Why? This does... See, I can't say I disagree with this. This does seem like something that is missing from the production. They talk about these things that are happening externally to what we're seeing on the stage, and it does feel like there's a little bit of historical context missing to explain why. Instead, what the show prioritizes are the scenes between Bonnie and Clyde and their relationship, which, when they fall very hard in love with each other at the beginning and the relationship doesn't necessarily develop, it's more about how they support each other as they endure increasingly difficult situations. Maybe we don't need so much of the two of them together. And yet, I can agree with all of that criticism, and I don't see how it brings you to a 2-star review. Let's go to the Evening Standard. Too glib to be serious and too po-faced to be a spoof. This Broadway musical about the Depression-era outlaw couple suffers from a criminal, lack of focus. The show's creators can't decide if they are romantic rebels or vicious murderers. Hint, it's the latter. Apart from one jazzy, one bluesy, and one superb gospel number, Frank Wildhorn's score mostly comprises generic string and slide guitar-driven soft rock. The only criticism there is the word generic, everything else is descriptive. Ivan Menschel's book is a by-the-numbers account of the couple's romance and criminal notoriety that hints the duo were failed by the American dream's promise of prosperity, and by the Bible-thumping Christianity of their native Texas. This is not the great American lyricist Don Black's finest hour either. Clyde's hymn to his motoring skills, When I Drive, rhyming with I'm Alive, is a case in point. What else are you going to rhyme drive with? More to the point, how eloquent is Clyde, an uneducated character, supposed to sound? I question that criticism, I really do, because there are some beautiful lyrics in that show as well. But lyrics ought to consistently be within the voice of the character who is singing them. That, I think, is very important. So this review then goes on to talk about the design elements of the lights punching through bullet holes in the proscenium to augment its truncated motorcar centerpiece. It's simple, stylish, but overly shouty. It also shoots its bolt early by starting with a dramatic but fairly well-known spoiler, Bonnie and Clyde meeting their demise in a hail of 167 steel-jacketed bullets. This is the second time we've seen someone take issue with the framing of the show being to begin with that. And yet I'm willing to defend that choice because I think it's the natural response of the writers taking what is assumed that people will already know about the story of Bonnie and Clyde and then building on it subsequently, taking them back to their origins and the details of the story that people may not have been aware of, and then taking us back to the inevitable thing that we know is going to happen, which adds a sense of tension throughout because you know where they're going to end up. Another show that does that very well with its framing is Hamilton. They tell you everything you might already know about him at the beginning of the show, and then they add in the rest of the detail. And contrastingly, Hamilton has been very favourably reviewed. I haven't heard the same criticism of the fact that at the end of the first song in Hamilton, they also deal out a fairly hefty spoiler about his ultimate demise. And given that both Hamilton and Bonnie and Clyde stories happened so many decades ago, I'd be more shocked to find out they were still alive than being told that they died. Jordan Luke Gage's rangy Clyde is a grinning cocksure psychopath who idolises Billy the Kid. The couple give off a decent whiff of sexual chemistry, and they have powerful voices, but both are occasionally flat. We've heard other reviews that have literally said note perfect. I think it was What's on Stage. Yep, note perfect is used in the What's on Stage review, and yet in the Evening Standard, both are occasionally flat. I have never heard either of those two singing those roles flat. I've heard Jordan sing Clyde 3 times now. I've heard Francis sing Bonnie 4 times. I have never heard a flat note come out of either of their mouths. But I'm wondering if that's a product of a more contemporary vocal that not everyone is necessarily accustomed to, where the tone is straighter, and that might make things sound a little bit more flat. Again, I've never had issue with the tonality of either of those performers. I'm just curious as to why someone might draw that conclusion. Scanning through the rest of this, the exposition is clumsy, cliches abound, moments of melodrama surface through a general air of levity. Bonnie and Clyde bicker about their billing while menacing a bank customer and exchange firearms as if they were sex toys, which I think is a great detail. Actually, I really like that about this show. I think their cavalier approach to the guns that they're using is actually quite funny, and it speaks to the childishness of their behaviour, even though they've become violent criminals. Throughout, I kept asking myself what the point was. There's no urgency or great inspiration behind the music here, and no real attempt to ponder the personalities or the significance of Bonnie and Clyde. It's just another bouncy, breezy, brainless musical trading on a bit of name recognition. Wow. I disagree that there's no urgency or inspiration behind the music. I think Frank Wildhorn and Don Black have delivered a powerful and enduring score here, and that's what's afforded the show the lasting fan success that it's had. Let's see what the stage has to say with another 2-star review. The story jumps back in time in an attempt to explain how things turned sour. The problem is, book writer Ivan Menchel's explanation process proves less than persuasive. It skirts around the issue, hinting at poverty, ambition, and coercion, instead focusing on the well-worn musical theatre tropes of romance, family, and fame. I believe I said something quite similar to this, that I would love to see more of the social issues that are briefly hinted at and that we sort of drive up to at various points throughout the show with the script and with the lyrics, but instead the big plot points are death and love being enduring. And ultimately, the story they're choosing to tell is a romantic one. So I don't know if this is critics arguing that that's not what they ought to be doing, or that a more valuable narrative could be had from doing something a little bit different. At what point do you keep insisting that the show ought to portray this story in a different way? And at what point do you just accept that that's the story that they've chosen to tell and assess the quality with which they have done that? It's a difficult one. Wildhorn's lively score ranges from jazz to gospel, with a few soaring rock choruses thrown in for good measure. Yet tonally, the show is all over the place, which is a problem that even Don Black's often sharp and incisive lyrics can't solve. See, that ultimately is praise for Don Black's lyrics, which is very different to what we had heard earlier. Another comment on the score where we are listing off these different genres that it contains. I have yet to read much real commentary on the quality of this score. I feel like there's so much talk about the narrative, there's so much talk about the book, and this is what I had been saying earlier, and this is what I'd been tweeting about, because very often I feel as though a lot of professional critics in London theatre, all of whom I respect tremendously, but I feel like a greater priority is given to criticising the narrative and the book of a show than there is to addressing its score. And I feel like musicals are held to the same standard as plays. Plays have their entire running time to deliver scripted, spoken dialogue, and musicals have a restricted time in which to do that because it happens around and between songs. And when you exclude the songs from your criticism and you focus only on the script, so many of these have had so much to say about Ivan Menschel's book, but comparatively less to actually analytically say about Frank Wildhorn and Don Black's score. When you exclude the songs and just focus on the book, you're excluding so much of the material. And that's the only conclusion I can come to about why these are 2-star reviews. Because even if you take a lot of these comments on board, which I do, I agree with an awful lot of what has been written here, the lowest I could conceive for this is a 3-star review, because these are still very strong performances. Even through this, I have not read many criticisms of any of the performances in this show. I have not read much criticism of Nick Winston's direction. It's all about the book and the script and the scope of the show. Do I think that knocks 3 stars off of a review? No, I feel like that's needlessly low, but I think the script is the only thing really being properly assessed, and the performances, the direction, and the score, those aren't given the necessary weight that they ought to be in uplifting the star rating of a review. Finally, we have Time Out. Now, this is always a good read. This impressively dull musical about America's most beloved mass murderers flopped on Broadway way back in 2011. But clearly there are those who've been carrying a torch for the show by Frank Wildhorn, Don Black, and Ivan Menschel, whose name is spelt wrongly. For me, the biggest problem is that the IRL Bonnie and Clyde, that's actually what's written here, were, and I don't mean this to be judgmental, sociopathic murderers. While the show basically argues that their defining characteristic was that they were an extremely romantic couple who just happened to incidentally machine gun a lot of people because 1930s Texas really sucked. I mean, he's not wrong. It spends an interminable spell trudging through the duo's pre-murder days. About 3/4 of the musical consists of plodding country ballads in which Frances Mayli McCann's Bonnie and Jordan Luke Gage's Clyde sing about how much they love each other and how tough the world is. They sing about their feelings about their love for each other a lot. I wouldn't even suggest that 3/4 of the musical is plodding country ballads. I think we've heard from all the other reviews how many different genres there are. There's gospel, there's rock. They've all been talking about it. Bluegrass. Did you hear about the bluegrass? I heard about the bluegrass. Despite the odd moment where Gage's Clyde goes a bit goth over some hair metal guitar, which is a huge oversimplification of what happens in that scene, by the way, the general vibe here seems to be that the couple were not that bad and were indeed redeemed by their love. I'm glad I'm not the only person who uses the word vibe in reviews. When Clyde kills his first policeman, he's shaken and sad and Bonnie is horrified. Then they have a big smooch and it's all fine. That is an odd turning point dramatically, where everything seems to get resolved very quickly. And I do think the show is slightly weaker for having reduced that scene where he does accidentally do that little bit of murdering. You'd think it might be action-packed, but the killings are hysterically downplayed, virtually treated as an inconvenience. They're all confined to the second half. There's only 2 out of 13 actually shown on stage. We've heard this commentary before, that a lot of the expected thrill of the show isn't actually present because it's more about the relationship between the two. It's more about this romantic angle than about the crime of it all. The story of Bonnie and Clyde with no death scene is a bold move, and I think maybe the idea is that ending their story in a shootout would be a bit tawdry, but this production is in no way moving enough to have earned that. It's like making a show about the Titanic with no iceberg. Which I don't know if I agree with. I think it's heavily enough implied, and we've been told at the beginning what happens, and I think that moment at the end of the show when they go from embracing each other in the car to turning and then suddenly they have the bullet holes and the blood on their faces, I think that's a really shocking moment, and you have to come to terms with the immediacy of what happened to them. In the previous version of the show, this was foreshadowed a little bit more because we had a scene where the police were actually putting together the plan that was going to be the one that would finally stop them, and that has been cut from this version, and I do think that that is a shame, and I do think that that may have circumvented a little bit of this criticism. Not all of it, but some. On the plus side, if you like sloggy country ballads sung very nicely, McCann and Gage have beautiful voices, as does Jodie Steele as Clyde's disapproving sister-in-law Blanche. Again, positive comments about their vocal performances. He does go on to say that Gage's Clyde is low on charisma here, which I find very difficult to believe. I think he's incredibly charismatic, almost too charismatic. Ultimately, Bonnie and Clyde feels weirdly oblivious to the reasons why Parker and Barrow are still famous a century on. Yes, they've always been romanticised, but the fact they were vicious criminals has always been intertwined with that. If this rose-tinted musical romance was all we had to remember them by, I'm sure their memory would soon expire from sheer boredom. I feel like this begins to take issue with the fact that the show exists at all, and that it's romanticising the story of Bonnie and Clyde with very little regard for the severity of their violent crimes, and I think it's shying away from that perhaps in not depicting them. And there's an argument to be had for that as well. Again, does that reduce it to a 2-star review? I'm not so sure. But in any case, I do think the big difference here between these print critics and the vloggers and myself seems to be that those that I've just read are focused very much on the overall narrative of the show and the nature of the adaptation and the material. Are we safe to assume that many of them will be meeting this material for the first time at this performance, whereas more of the bloggers will have seen the concert version, will have seen the run at the Arts Theatre, will have listened to the cast recording before? They will be bigger fans of the material going in. Does that mean their criticism is less valid because they have a fan's perspective? Perhaps. Does it also afford them a greater level of understanding of the material? Perhaps. I think this disparity might expose things like some of those scenes being removed from the Arts Theatre run that has left other critics questioning why certain choices were made, and because some of the bloggers perhaps were going into it already knowing about those, they sort of took for granted that not everyone would have that level of context. Context is something we've heard about a lot in some of these reviews. But I do think increasingly when I'm reading reviews, and not just for this show, there are so many professional critics who are omitting commentary on the score and on the performances and are disregarding the fact that those can elevate a show. I guarantee you, when you read bloggers and when you watch videos, you will hear discussion of particular songs, you will hear discussion of vocal performances and of the performers, and for the most part a lot of these reviews curtail that, and they talk about the script as if these are plays where the songs are incidental and not a musical that's been crafted very well, a proper book musical with an original score where the songs are pivotal to the narrative of the show. So that has been my analysis of the reviews of Bonnie and Clyde, and I hope that has given you a little bit of an insight as to why we have such different star ratings going on. If you have seen Bonnie and Clyde at the Garrick Theatre, if you saw it at the Arts as well, feel free to add in your opinion as well. Why not at this point? Weigh in down below. Do you agree with any of the things I've said in today's video? If you were a critic and you were pressed to give a star rating, what star rating would you give to Bonnie and Clyde and why? I'm very much looking forward to reading all of your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel for more videos just like this one. And don't forget, my video review of Bonnie and Clyde is coming out very soon, but if you can't wait and you want to watch it right now, it is already live for my YouTube members. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!